tell us how this book came to be.
I had an email one day come through from my agent probably 2.5 years ago now. It's a snowy morning in Missoula, where I live. And there were 2 lines on this email, and one was a sentence from her that said, "Is there a good story here?" And it was a link to a National Park Service blog post. And that blog post was just a short, 500-word post commemorating the 50th anniversary of this climb. And I had been steeped at that point in the mountain world for years. I'd been writing about adventure, women's issues in adventure, and I had never heard of this. And I was intrigued and thinking this was something we should have heard of, the way that we know that, say, Lynn Hill freed the nose in Yosemite in the early 90s, right? And the more I dug into this story, I realized this wasn't just the first all-female ascent of Denali, which on its own is a huge accomplishment. This was the first all-female ascent in history of any of the world's big peaks. This is a big deal.
What's the gnarliest peak you've ever climbed?
I have some imposter syndrome. You guys are gonna be front row seats for my imposter syndrome. That I am not a mountaineer. I have a serious fear of exposure unless I have skis on my feet, so I'm more of a ski mountaineer. I've climbed Kilimanjaro, which is the easiest of the world's 7 summits. So.
Well, that's pretty bad. So what I get to do now, I get to disappear, and I'm going to let Cassidy read what she'd like to kind of just give you a taste of this book and kind of get your interest tickled a little bit. So Cassidy, take it away.
By 1970, when this climb took place, we had sent men to the moon, and women hadn't stood on the high points of the earth, which is wild, right? It's not that long ago. But popular belief at that time held that women were incapable of withstanding high altitude, savage elements, of carrying these heavy loads up storm-ravaged slopes day after day without men's help. And everyone knew that their periods made them weaker and prone to hysteria on a monthly basis. Which is why this was such a big deal, right? As I was telling you all and Brian just now that this was the first all-women's ascent of any of the high peaks. It wasn't just that, it was also this improbable tale of survival. What these women did is incredible at a time when if you had trouble on Denali, nobody was coming for you. You died there. And yet somehow this feat, what they were able to do, escaped widespread notice and basically just disappeared from our collective consciousness. And I think there are a lot of stories like this, actually, and I think it's one reason there's this void in the literary canon now of strong and complex women, and not just in the literary canon, but in our accepted historical record, right? And we're in this era, I feel safe saying this in this crowd, and we should feel safe saying it in any crowd, that we're in this era when women's accomplishment and minority accomplishments are literally being scrubbed from the historical record, and that's absolutely unacceptable. And I think, one, that drew me to this story, right? This idea that when you think of mainstream adventure and exploration stories, probably you think of things like endurance and into thin air and touching the void. And few of those, I can't think of any actually mainstream ones that feature women, let alone stories that feature complex women, right? Because too often in our literary canon, in history in general, women were, and I would argue even still today, but especially in that era, women were only allowed to play the traditional roles they've been historically assigned, right? And we all know what those are. Princess, witch, lone heroine, damsel in distress. And you're supposed to be likable or you're villainized for being unlikable. And one thing about this story, man, none of these women were one-dimensional. They were complicated, and there is not a woman among them who was a clear-cut saint or sinner, and I loved that.